Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind was a knife that night, cold and sharp and cutting through every layer of wool and leather the men of the Dreadfort could muster. The banners above the gate, pink men flayed upon red, snapped in the dark as if alive, and in the courtyard below, a young man stood beneath them, grinning at the storm. Ramsay Snow loved the cold. It made other men slow, made them clumsy and desperate. But for him, it was a kind of companion, honest and merciless, just as he fancied himself to be. He stood there watching the snowflakes twist through the torchlight, his pale face half hidden beneath the hood of a thick fur cloak. Around him, the courtyard bustled with uneasy activity, soldiers tightening saddle straps, stable boys scurrying about with feed and water, and the rasp of steel as a dozen men checked their blades. They were to ride before dawn. A village along the weeping water had been attacked 2 nights past. The wildlings had come down through the woods, burnt 3 huts, and carried off 12 souls, women and boys mostly. The sergeant who brought the news to the Dreadfort had spoken of it tremblingly, as though the flames still burned behind his eyes. Lord Roose Bolton had listened in silence, his pale, calm gaze as steady as still water. Then, without lifting his voice, he said, "My bastard will see to it." And that was that. Ramsay had not missed the faint trace of amusement, or was it warning, in his father's tone. Roose Bolton did not give tasks to his son to test his strength. He gave them to test his control. Now Ramsay stood before his small band, 15 riders and a pack of his own hounds. Their eyes were on him, though none dared meet his gaze for long. He was young, barely past 20, but the stories had already spread like fire through dry grass. Tales of what he did to poachers, to maids who displeased him, to his father's enemies who ended up on the flaying tables below the Dreadfort. He liked the stories. He liked them because they made men afraid, and fear was better than loyalty. The kennel master, a thick-shouldered man with a face chewed by frost and time, came to his side, holding the leash of a monstrous black hound. "She's ready, my lord," the man said, tugging slightly to keep the beast from lunging forward. "Her name?" Ramsay asked. "Midnight, my lord. Fast and mean." Ramsay reached down to stroke the dog's head, his gloved fingers brushing the coarse fur. The animal tensed, sensing his intent, and growled low in its throat. Ramsay smiled. "Oh, I like her." He looked back toward the Dreadfort's high tower, where a single window glowed faintly behind thick stone. He knew his father was up there, watching, perhaps with that same unreadable expression. Roose Bolton was not a man of warmth or affection. He preferred silence, calculation, and control. Ramsay both feared and hated him for it, and yet longed for his approval, like a starving man for bread. "My lord," said one of the soldiers, a scarred rider named Dustin, "the snows are heavy north of the weeping water. We might lose the trail if we wait much longer." Ramsay turned, his grin still fixed in place. "Then we shall not wait." He swung into his saddle, black cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow. "Mount up, my dogs. Let us see if the wild folk can run faster than my hounds." The gate creaked open, spilling a gust of frozen wind across the courtyard. The riders moved out in single file, their torches flickering against the white dark of the storm. Ramsay rode at the front, the hound trotting beside him, sniffing the air with eager hunger. Beyond the walls, the world was endless white. The forest lay ahead, a maze of black trees and drifting snow. Somewhere in that frozen wilderness, the raiders waited. For the first few miles, there was only the sound of hooves and wind. Then, as dawn broke in a dull gray shimmer over the horizon, Ramsay called a halt near a frozen stream. "Tracks," said Dustin, pointing to the snow. Faint, but visible. The uneven prints of many feet, men and women both. Ramsay dismounted, crouching beside them. He touched the snow, brought it to his nose, and smiled. They passed here not 2 days ago. The storm has hidden most of it, but not well enough. He rose and turned to his men. "We follow the prince north. Keep your eyes sharp. Wildlings are rats. They scatter when cornered, but they bite when desperate." As they rode on, the tracks led deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, their branches heavy with frost. Shadows shifted between the trunks, and once or twice Ramsay thought he glimpsed movement ahead, too quick to be certain. By midday, they found the remains of a camp, ashes still warm beneath the snow, bits of charred bone, and the stripped carcass of a horse. "Not far now," Ramsay murmured. But something about the scene set his teeth on edge. The camp was too clean. No scraps left behind, no hastily abandoned tools or furs. Whoever these wildlings were, they were clever or careful. He glanced at Midnight, who had begun to growl softly, her eyes fixed on the tree line. Ramsay straightened, scanning the woods. Snow fell soundlessly around them. "Form a circle," he ordered. The men obeyed at once, swords drawn, eyes darting between the trees. The silence stretched, long, cold, unbroken, until a voice called out from the woods. "You track well, bastard." It was a woman's voice, low, fierce, with the rhythm of the north in it. Ramsay's grin widened. "Show yourself," he called back. Snow shifted, and out from behind the trees stepped a tall woman clad in furs, her face painted with streaks of ash. In her hand was a long spear tipped with black iron. She smiled at him, and in her eyes he saw something dangerous, not fear, but amusement. "I've been waiting for you, little lord," she said. "They say the Dreadfort's dogs are the finest hunters in the north. Let us see if they can keep up." And before any man could move, she vanished into the trees, leaving only laughter on the wind. Ramsay's grin faded. His hound barked wildly, straining at the leash. He looked at his men, eyes glittering with fury and excitement. "After her," he hissed. "Run her down." And so began the hunt, one that would not end as Ramsay Snow intended. The snow thickened as the riders plunged into the forest, their torches sputtering in the wind. Branches clawed at cloaks and horses alike, and the world seemed to shrink to the ring of hooves and the ragged breath of men and hounds. Somewhere ahead, that wildling woman moved like a shadow between the trees, always just beyond sight. "Fan out," Ramsay barked, his voice sharp as the frost in the air. "Drive her into the open." They obeyed, fanning wide through the trees, though none were eager to stray too far from the sound of their comrades. These woods had an old, uneasy silence to them, the kind that made men feel watched. Ramsay felt it too, though he would never admit as much. He rode hard, ducking low beneath a fallen branch, his black cloak whipping behind him. Midnight bounded ahead, her muzzle low, sniffing the wind. The hound's growl deepened, and Ramsay's pulse quickened with it. Then, a whistle. A high, sharp note carried faintly through the snow. An arrow hissed past his ear. Another struck one of the riders behind him, the man jerking sideways in his saddle before tumbling into the drift. The horse screamed, bolting into the dark. "Ambush!" someone cried. Ramsay laughed. a raw, fierce sound that startled even his own men. "Good!" he shouted, yanking his reins. "Let them come!" Shapes moved in the storm, half-seen figures with fur cloaks and crude spears. The Bolton riders closed ranks, swords flashing as the wildlings fell upon them. The clash was brief and brutal. Ramsay spurred forward, his blade carving through the storm, hacking down a man who came too close. He felt the warmth of blood spatter his cheek, and it thrilled him. When the last of the wildlings broke and fled, 3 Bolton men lay dead, another moaning with an arrow through his thigh. Ramsay dismounted beside the bodies, breathing hard, eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of joy. "Take their heads," he said. "We'll bring them home for the kennels." Dustin, grim and gray-faced, hesitated. "My lord, we should burn them. It's cold enough for corpses to draw wolves." Ramsay's gaze snapped to him. "Then let the wolves feed. I'll have their heads." No one spoke again. The work was done quickly, and the heads were tied in a burlap sack and slung over a horse. The wounded man was left where he lay. Ramsay said it would teach him to ride faster next time. By dusk, they made camp beneath a stand of pine trees. The snow had eased, and the forest was still again. The only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the crackle of a small fire. The air smelled of smoke and pine sap. Ramsay sat apart, staring into the flames. The spearwife's face haunted him, the way she had smiled, as though mocking him. Few dared mock Ramsay Snow and lived long afterward. Dustin approached cautiously, holding a half-charred rabbit on a spit. "We'll need to turn south soon, my lord. The storm will bury the trail by morning." Ramsay looked up, eyes narrow and bright. "You think I'll ride home empty-handed? You think I'll tell my father a wildling woman slipped my leash?" "No, my lord, only—" "Then keep your tongue behind your teeth and your sword ready." He rose, brushing snow from his cloak, and turned toward the dark beyond the fire. "She's close. I can smell her fear." But the scent Ramsay followed that night was not fear. It was bait. Near midnight, when most of his men had dozed by the fire, Ramsay took Midnight and 2 others and went ahead, following the faint trail through the woods. The moon broke through the clouds for a moment, silvering the snow. Then the dog stopped, ears pricked, muscles taut. Midnight began to whine. Ramsay crouched, frowning, running his fingers through the snow. There, boot prints, small, light, circling back. "Wait," he whispered, but the warning came too late. A branch cracked above them, and something heavy dropped from the trees. One of the riders screamed as a spear punched through his chest. Another man wheeled about, slashing wildly, but an arrow took him in the throat. Ramsay dove aside, rolling through the snow, his dagger flashing up in time to parry a thrust. The spearwife stood before him, eyes fierce, hair wild with frost. "You shouldn't have come, bastard," she hissed. Ramsay grinned, teeth bared like the hound beside him. "Oh, but I wanted to meet you properly." They circled each other, the snow swirling between them. She lunged, fast as a cat, but Ramsay caught the haft of her spear, twisting it aside. He struck back, slashing for her belly, but she was gone again, darting into the dark. Midnight gave chase, barking furiously. Ramsay followed, breath steaming in the cold. He heard the crack of branches ahead, the thud of running feet. Then silence. When he caught up, the hound was whining, pawing at a patch of snow. Ramsay knelt and saw the truth. A snare, cunningly hidden. Midnight had sprung it, her leg caught in the iron jaws. Ramsay's rage boiled over. He drew his knife and cut the trap apart, then rose, scanning the trees. "You'll pay for that, witch!" he shouted into the night. Only the wind answered. By dawn, he returned to camp with blood on his hands and fury in his heart. 4 men remained. The rest were dead or scattered. Dustin looked up as Ramsay rode in, his face pale. "What happened, my lord?" Ramsay dismounted, eyes flat as ice. "We've been hunting ghosts," he said, "but ghosts bleed like anyone else." He reached into his saddlebag and drew out a length of torn fur, part of her cloak, caught on a branch. "She's heading north, toward the river. We'll catch her there." Dustin hesitated. "We're few now, perhaps—" Ramsay's hand moved quick as a snake. The knife was in his palm, the tip pressing lightly to Dustin's throat. "Perhaps what?" The man swallowed. "Perhaps nothing, my lord." Ramsay smiled and sheathed the blade. "Good. Then saddle the horses. The hunt's not done." They rode again, weary and silent, through the day's pale light. Ramsay said nothing, though inside his mind burned with plans. When he caught her, he would not kill her quickly. No, he would learn her name, her secrets, her purpose. And then, slowly, he would take her apart. But fate has a taste for irony, and Ramsay Snow was not the only hunter that walked those woods. As twilight fell, they reached the frozen banks of the weeping water. Across the river, faint through the mist, they saw smoke rising from a camp. Tents, fires, men. Ramsay's smile returned. "There she is," he whispered. "And she's brought friends." He turned to his men. "Circle round. We strike when the moon is high." None dared refuse. Above them, the northern sky stretched wide and merciless, its stars cold as blades. And beneath that silent sky, the bastard of the Dreadfort rode on, unaware that before dawn, the hunter would stand face to face with those who had laid a snare not for his hound, but for him. For in that camp beyond the river waited not wildlings, but men sworn to another house, men who bore the roaring giant of the Umbers upon their shields. And their trap was closing fast. The night deepened, black as ink and sharp as broken glass. The forest lay silent around the weeping water, save for the creak of ice and the faint whisper of the wind. Ramsay Snow crouched upon a low ridge above the frozen river, his pale eyes fixed upon the flickering glow of the campfires across the way. Through the drifting mist, he counted figures, perhaps 20, perhaps more. Rough tents made of hide and fur stood in a half-circle near the trees, and sentries paced between them. Yet something about their stance, their armor, set Ramsay's teeth on edge. These were not the ragged wildlings he'd hunted before. They stood too straight, too disciplined. Their shields caught the firelight, and for a moment, Ramsay saw what marked them. Painted sigils of a roaring giant, white on black. Umber men. He frowned, his breath misting in the air. "The last hearth," he muttered. "So that's your game." Behind him, the few riders left alive shifted uneasily. Dustin, pale and weary, leaned close. "The Umbers, my lord." Then this was no wildling raid. Ramsay's grin was slow and cruel. "A test," he said. "My father's neighbors wish to see what sort of bastard the Dreadfort breeds." He rose, brushing snow from his knees. "They'll learn soon enough." The others exchanged uncertain glances. They were cold, half-starved, and far from home. But none dared speak against him. Ramsay's temper was legend, and his blade faster than thought. As the moon climbed higher, he moved along the ridge, studying the camp's layout. The Umbers had chosen well. Back to the woods, front to the river, fires spaced in a defensive arc. Yet even a clever camp could be broken, if one knew where to press. "Dustin," Ramsay whispered, "take the hounds east. When you hear my signal, drive them across the river. The noise will draw their eyes." The older man nodded, though fear shone plain in his eyes. "And you, my lord?" Ramsay's smile gleamed faintly in the dark. "I'll be waiting on the far side to greet them." He slipped away down the slope, silent as the snow itself. The river's surface gleamed like glass, and he moved across it with careful steps, listening for the groan of the ice. Halfway across, he paused, peering into the mist. The fires wavered through the fog, and somewhere beyond them came the low murmur of men's voices. When he reached the opposite bank, he drew his knife and crouched low among the roots of an old pine. His heart beat steady, slow. He lived for this pulse of danger, this moment before the bloodletting. Then it came. A distant howl, long and fierce, shattered the stillness. The hounds. Shouts rose in the camp. Men grabbed for weapons, torches flaring bright. Ramsay slipped between the shadows as chaos bloomed. He came upon a sentry alone near the tree line, the man turning at the sound. Ramsay's knife found his throat before he could cry out. The bastard dragged the corpse aside, wiping the blade on the man's cloak, and pressed on. The camp was in uproar now, hounds baying, horses screaming, men yelling orders that no one obeyed. Through the confusion, Ramsay moved like a wraith, cutting down two more before any knew he was among them. But as he neared the center fire, a shape stepped from the smoke. A woman, spear in hand, face painted with ash. The spear wife. "I told you," she said, voice low but steady. "You shouldn't have come." Ramsay's grin widened. "You've led me to quite the welcome." "Not mine," she said. "Theirs." Even as he turned, he saw them. 3 great men in chain and furs, stepping from the darkness. One carried a hammer, another a long axe, and the third bore a steel-pointed spear. The sigil of the Umber giant gleamed on their cloaks. "Ramsay Snow," the largest of them growled, "Rose's whelp, we've been waiting for you." Ramsay's blood sang in his veins. "Then stop waiting." The clash was sudden and brutal. The first Umber swung his hammer, missing by a hair as Ramsay ducked beneath it and slashed for the man's side. His knife scraped against mail, drawing only sparks. The second came from behind, axe cleaving downward. Ramsay twisted, catching the blow on his blade, then drove his knee into the man's gut. The spear wife moved quick as lightning, thrusting for his throat, but he caught the haft and shoved her back into the firelight. "You fight well," he said between gritted teeth. "I almost believe you're worth the trouble." The third Umber charged, bellowing like the beast upon his banner. Ramsay feinted right, then ducked left, driving his dagger into the man's thigh. The giant roared and fell to one knee. And then, as suddenly as it began, the battle turned. A horn blew, a deep, rolling sound from the forest beyond. Torches flared on the far side of the river. Ramsay froze, realizing too late what it meant. More men, dozens of them. The Umbers had not come alone. Dustin's voice echoed faintly from the darkness, a shout of confusion, then a scream. Ramsay saw shapes on the ice, his riders falling, the hounds scattering, arrows cutting them down. He turned to flee, but the spearwife's shaft swept his legs from under him. The next moment, her boot pressed to his chest, the point of her spear hovering just above his throat. "You're quick," she said, "but not quick enough." Ramsay's mind raced. "Kill me, and my father will flay your lord alive." Her eyes narrowed. "Your father sent you, didn't he? To see who'd rise to the bait, to learn if the Umbers would defy him." Ramsay said nothing. "You were never hunting wildlings," she went on. "You were hunting men, Bolton's men, but we were hunting you." She pressed the spear harder, drawing a thin line of blood down his neck. "Tell me, bastard, did your father mean for you to die here?" Ramsay met her gaze, unflinching. "He meant for me to prove myself." and then he moved. In one savage motion, he grabbed the shaft of the spear, wrenching it aside as he drove his knee upward. The woman staggered. Ramsay rolled to his feet, seized a burning brand from the fire, and hurled it into her face. She screamed, dropping her weapon. Before the embers could close in, Ramsay fled into the darkness, vanishing into the trees. Arrows hissed after him, but none struck true. He ran until his lungs burned, and his legs turned to ice beneath him. Only when the shouts faded behind did he slow, leaning against a tree. Blood trickled down his neck, warm against the cold. He laughed softly to himself, half in triumph, half in madness. By the time dawn crept over the forest, Ramsay was alone. His men were dead, his hounds gone, his prey vanished, yet he was alive. And that, he told himself, was victory enough. When he finally staggered back to the Dreadfort 2 days later, frostbitten and ragged, Rose Bolton awaited him in the hall. The Lord's pale eyes watched him without expression. "You've been tested," Rose said, "and found wanting perhaps, but not broken." Ramsay knelt, head bowed, though his eyes gleamed with a wolfish light. "I will do better next time," he murmured. Rose regarded him for a long, silent moment. "See that you do. For the next time, it will not be the Umbers testing you. It will be the North itself." Ramsay smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried no warmth at all. "The North," he whispered. "Then let it come." Outside, the wind rose, howling across the battlements of the Dreadfort, carrying with it the promise of blood yet to be spilled. The Dreadfort loomed against a sky the color of old steel, its towers clawing upward through the winter haze. Smoke curled from its chimneys, black against the pale light of dawn. Ramsay Snow rode through the gates as the portcullis groaned open, his horse staggering beneath him. Frost crusted his beard, and his cloak was stiff with dried blood. Behind him trailed no banner, no hound, no companion, only silence. The guards watched him pass with wary eyes. None spoke. Word traveled faster than riders in the north, and already they had heard whispers of what had befallen the bastard's hunt. He dismounted in the courtyard, tossing his reins to a stable boy who shrank back at his glance. Ramsay's pale lips curled into a faint smile. Fear, even from a child, was a comfort. It reminded him he still held power, no matter how empty his saddle had become. Inside the hall, fires burned low in the hearth. Rose Bolton sat at the high table, wrapped in a fur cloak so dark it seemed to swallow the light. His expression, as ever, betrayed nothing. Ramsay dropped to one knee, his head bowed. "Father," he began, but Rose's voice cut across the hall like the hiss of a blade leaving its sheath. "Rise." Ramsay obeyed. His father's eyes, pale and colorless as river ice, studied him in silence. "You went north," Rose said at last, "to hunt wildlings. You returned without your men, your hounds, or proof of your kill." Ramsay met his gaze. There were no wildlings. The raiders were Umber men. A faint flicker crossed Rose's face, interest perhaps, or irritation. "Umber men?" Ramsay nodded. "They used a spearwife as bait. They knew we'd come. I killed some, but there were too many. I lived because I am quicker than the rest." "You lived," Rose murmured, "and the rest did not. That is the tale you bring me." Ramsay stiffened. It was a trap. They meant to test us. Perhaps. Rose leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Or perhaps they meant to see what sort of fool I've sired. Ramsay's jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, rage flared within him, hot and wild. But he smothered it quickly, the way he had learned to smother every fire that might draw his father's notice. Rose's tone softened, not kindly, but as though he were speaking to something he meant to sharpen rather than discard. Do you know why I sent you? To prove myself, Ramsay said. To learn, Rose corrected. The North is not kept by strength alone. Fear must be tended like a flame. Let it burn too bright, and it devours you. Let it fade, and men forget who rules them. He rose then, his movements silent as falling snow. You will stay at the Dreadfort until I say otherwise. Your hunts are done. Ramsay's voice broke the stillness, low but edged. You think to cage me? Rose turned, his pale eyes cold. If you were a dog, I would chain you. But you are my blood, though bastard-born, so I will not chain you. I will watch, and I will see if the beast I raised learns to obey. He left the hall without another word. Ramsay stood alone, the firelight painting his face in flickering red. The air smelled of smoke and damp stone. Slowly, he smiled, a thin, dangerous curve. He understood now. Rose had never wanted him to win that hunt. He had wanted to see how his bastard faced failure. Very well. Ramsay Snow would learn. He would become what his father wanted, a creature of cunning and patience. But he would never forget the sting of humiliation, nor the laughter of the spearwife who had outwitted him. That night, he walked the kennels alone. The air there was thick with the scent of fur and filth, of fear and hunger. The hounds stirred as he passed, eyes glinting from the shadows. Midnight limped from her pen, her leg bandaged from the trap's bite. Ramsay knelt beside her, stroking her head. You were loyal, he murmured, more than most men. The hound whined softly. Ramsay's gaze grew distant, cold. Next time we'll be ready for them, you and I. He rose and moved toward the far wall, where iron hooks hung empty. I'll need new hounds, he said softly, and new prey. Days passed. The snows thickened, swallowing the world beyond the Dreadfort's crimson walls. Ramsay spent his hours training with the swordmaster, riding the yards, walking the battlements, always watched by his father's silent men. Yet beneath that cold routine, his mind burned with restless purpose. One evening, as he paced the hall, the steward approached. A rider from Barrowton, my lord, the man said, bowing. He brings tidings. A girl fled from the miller's village by the weeping water. Some say she took coin that was not hers. Ramsay's smile bloomed like frost. A thief, then. How fortunate. The steward hesitated. Lord Rose forbade you from riding. Ramsay's eyes glittered. He forbade me from hunting men. This one's a girl. I shall call it Mercy. Before dawn, he rode out with 3 men and midnight at his side. The trail was fresh, bare feet in the snow, light and hurried. They followed it through the birchwood until they came upon her at the edge of the river, wrapped in a threadbare cloak. She was young, fair-haired, her face pinched with hunger and cold. When she saw them, she froze like a doe before the hounds. "Mercy, my lord!" she cried as Ramsay dismounted. "I only took a crust, I swear it!" Ramsay approached, his voice almost gentle. "You'll not freeze alone tonight. Come with me. We'll see you fed." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Truly?" He smiled. "Truly." He wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and led her back toward the horses. None spoke as they rode through the falling snow. By nightfall, the Dreadfort's torches gleamed ahead. Rose Bolton was not there to see what followed. He had ridden to Winterfell on other business, leaving his son to his own devices. In the kennels, the fires burned low. The hounds stirred restlessly as Ramsay entered, the girl trembling beside him. He turned to her, his smile still soft. "You see? Warmth, food, a roof above your head. You are safe now." Her relief broke in a shuddering sob. "Thank you, my lord. I'll serve you, I swear it. Anything you..." He touched a finger to her lips. "Hush, you've done enough." When the first scream rose above the howling wind, none dared enter the kennels. By dawn, silence had returned. Later that day, Ramsay stood upon the battlements, watching the snow fall over the frozen river. Midnight sat beside him, muzzle red. In the courtyard below, the men whispered. Some said the girl had run away again. Others said the hounds had been fed a feast they did not deserve. Ramsay said nothing. He only smiled, eyes distant and cold. In the depths of his heart, the beast that Rose Bolton feared was no longer stirring. It was awake, winter deepened, and with it came silence. A heavy, unbroken stillness that wrapped the Dreadfort like a shroud. Snow blanketed the world, burying road and field alike, and only the crows dared stir the air with their cries. Within the castle walls, the fires burned low, and the men moved softly, wary of the moods of their lord's bastard. Ramsay Snow had grown quiet since the hunt. Too quiet, some whispered. He spent his days alone in the kennels or the training yard, his nights walking the halls where the torches burned dim. He spoke little, laughed less, yet there was a tension in him, like a bow drawn too long, waiting for the string to snap. When Roose Bolton returned from Winterfell, he found his bastard changed, not humbled, never that, but sharpened, like steel tempered by fire. At supper, Rose studied him over the rim of a cup of wine. "You've been busy, I hear." Ramsay looked up from his plate, where he'd been idly cutting a slice of venison into neat, perfect squares. "The Dreadfort grows dull without you, father. I must find ways to pass the hours." Rose's expression did not change. "A girl went missing near the kennels." "Did she?" Ramsay asked, feigning surprise. "The snow hides many things." The silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly, and the shadows danced upon the stone walls. Then Rose set down his cup. "You think cruelty makes you strong." Ramsay's smile was thin and sharp. "It keeps men obedient." "It keeps them silent," Rose said, his tone flat. "And silence is not loyalty." Ramsay leaned back in his chair. "Loyalty is earned through fear, father, and I am a patient teacher." Rose's eyes, pale as milk, flickered toward him. A teacher who will one day run out of students. No more was said. That night, as the hall emptied, Ramsay lingered by the fire. He watched the embers glow and fade, and thought of the spear wife who had bested him, the one who had laughed. He could still hear it, faint and mocking, carried on the wind. He would find her again. He swore it. A week later, a messenger arrived from Barrowton, bearing tidings that stirred the Dreadfort's stillness. Bands of free folk, newly fled from beyond the wall, had been sighted near the lonely hills. Some had turned to raiding farms and villages for food. Rose summoned his captains to the hall, maps spread before him on the long table. "If the tales are true," he said, "they number fewer than 50, hungry, desperate, unarmed. A small band could break them easily." Ramsay spoke from the shadows. "Allow me." His father regarded him without expression. "You failed the last hunt, and learned from it." Ramsay's voice was low but steady. "You said once that fear must be tended. Let me tend it, father. Let the North see that no hand defies the Dreadfort and lives." The hall grew still. At last, Rose gave a faint nod. "Take 20 men. Bring me their heads." Ramsay's grin flashed, sharp as broken glass. "Gladly." The next morning, the bastard of Bolton rode out again. The air was bitter and still. The sky hung low and gray, pressing upon the frozen world. The men rode in silence, their faces wrapped against the cold. By dusk, they reached the lonely hills. bleak mounds of snow and stone, stripped bare by the wind. Smoke curled from a hollow between the ridges. Ramsay dismounted, crouching low, eyes narrowing as he studied the faint orange flicker below. "They're there," he said softly. "Fools enough to light a fire." The men spread out at his command. When darkness fell, they descended upon the camp like wolves. The fight was brief. The wildlings, half-starved and ragged, broke before the charge. Ramsay cut through them without mercy, his laughter echoing across the snow. When it was done, 10 lay dead and the rest scattered into the dark. But as he wiped his blade clean, a sound reached him, a low groan. He turned. A woman lay among the slain, blood soaking her furs, a spear clutched weakly in her hand. Her face was pale beneath streaks of ash and dirt, but her eyes still burned bright. Recognition struck him like a blow. "You," he breathed. The spearwife who had led him into the Umber's trap. She tried to rise, but her wound held her down. "You again," she rasped. "The bastard who thinks himself a lord." Ramsay crouched beside her, his knife gleaming in the firelight. "You cost me good men," he said. "You made me crawl back here like a beaten dog." Her lips twisted into a smile. "Then perhaps you've learned how to crawl." He struck her across the face, the sound sharp in the cold air. Blood welled from her mouth, but still she smiled. "You'll never be your father," she said. "You haven't the stomach to wait for what you want." Ramsay's expression changed, almost pity, almost curiosity. Then he drove the knife into her belly. Her breath hitched, eyes wide. "Do you think this makes you strong?" she gasped. Ramsay leaned close, whispering against her ear. "No, but it makes me happy." When he rode back to the Dreadfort, her head hung from his saddle, the eyes still open. In the hall, he laid it at his father's feet. "You asked for their heads," he said. "I brought the one that mattered." Rose studied the grisly trophy without flinching. "The rest?" "Dead," Ramsay said, "or fled into the snow." Rose nodded once. "A pity. Dead men tell no tales. But this one," he looked down at the head, "tells enough." He rose, turning his cold gaze upon his son. "The North will whisper of this. They will whisper of you. Make certain they whisper the right things." Ramsay bowed slightly. "They will whisper of fear." "Good." Rose's voice softened to a near whisper. "Just remember, Ramsay, fear can turn. One day it will bite the hand that feeds it." Ramsay met his eyes. "Then I'll break its teeth." Later, alone in his chambers, he sat before the window, watching the snow drift against the glass. The world outside was quiet, white, and endless. He thought of his father's words, and of the laughter that had haunted his dreams. The spearwife was gone now, her voice silenced forever. Yet her final smile lingered in his mind, as though mocking him from beyond the grave. Ramsay rose and crossed to the mirror that hung above his table. His reflection stared back, pale skin, black hair, eyes like frozen stone. For a long time, he studied his own face. Then he whispered, "You'll see, Father. You'll all see." He turned away, and somewhere deep in the kennels below, the hounds began to howl. The sound carried through the halls, long and low and hungry, until even the guards upon the walls felt their blood run cold. And so the bastard of Bolton slept that night, with the music of beasts beneath him and the cold promise of his father's shadow above. The snows did not cease that winter. They fell day after day until the world beyond the Dreadfort's crimson walls became a blur of white and gray. The weeping water froze so deeply that wolves could cross it without breaking the surface, and even the crows grew silent in the fields. The north was asleep beneath its shroud of frost, and Ramsay Snow ruled over that silence like a restless ghost. Weeks passed since the hunt, and though Rose Bolton said little, the shape of his thoughts was plain. The tale of Ramsay's vengeance had spread beyond the Dreadfort's lands. Peasants whispered of the bastard who rode in storms, whose hounds smelled blood before it was spilled. Some said he was not wholly mortal, that the old gods had cursed him for the sins of his father. Others said worse. Ramsay did not care. Fear was better than honor. Fear lasted. He spent his nights in the kennels, pacing between the cages, speaking softly to the beasts that stared with yellow eyes from the shadows. "You understand me," he would whisper. "You do not judge. You only hunger, as I do." Midnight, her leg now healed, followed at his heel wherever he went. She was his truest companion, loyal and cruel. Together they patrolled the castle's depths, the flaying chambers, the cellars, the vaults where the bones of Bolton men lay stacked like firewood. It was there, one night, that he found a visitor waiting. A man stood in the torchlight, tall and lean, his hair pale as the frost outside. He wore the sigil of House Bolton upon his cloak. "My lord," he said, bowing slightly, "I am Sir Walton, your father's sworn sword. He sends me to speak with you." Ramsay regarded him warily. "Speak then." "There is trouble near the White Knife," Walton said. "A village has gone silent. No trade, no messengers, no fire seen for 3 nights. Your father wishes it looked into." Ramsay's eyes gleamed. "And he sends me?" "He sends me to escort you," the knight corrected. For a long moment, Ramsay said nothing. Then he smiled faintly. "Very well. We ride at dawn." The journey south was slow. The snow lay deep, and the wind cut like razors. They followed the river's edge through a forest of black pines, where the silence grew heavier with each mile. Ramsay rode ahead, cloak billowing behind him, Midnight trotting close beside. When at last they reached the village, it stood empty. The houses sagged beneath the snow, their doors open, their hearths cold. No sound but the whisper of the wind through cracked shutters. The smell came first, a sickly sweetness that froze in the air. "Gods," muttered one of the men, covering his mouth. "What happened here?" Ramsay dismounted, his boots crunching over the drifted snow. He peered through a doorway and saw them. Bodies, a dozen or more, huddled near the hearth as though they had died together for warmth. Their faces were gray, their eyes open. "Not wildlings," Walton murmured, kneeling beside one. "No wounds, no blood, just gone." Ramsay knelt, brushing snow from a corpse's hand. No sign of struggle. They did not fight. They froze, or something worse. He rose and looked about. Tracks marked the snow outside. Bare feet, many of them, leading away toward the forest. "Survivors?" Walton asked. "Perhaps," Ramsay said softly. "Or perhaps something that used to be." He gave the order to follow. The trail wound between the trees, faint but steady. After an hour, the forest opened into a clearing. At its center stood a stone circle, half buried beneath the snow. And within it, something burned. A single fire, small and steady, with no fuel to feed it. The men hung back, murmuring prayers. Ramsay stepped forward alone. The air grew colder as he neared the circle. The fire's light flickered upon the stones, where strange marks had been carved, old runes, worn by time. Then he saw them, figures kneeling around the flames, motionless as statues. Their skin was pale, their hair white with frost, and when Ramsay called out, none moved. Only when he drew his blade did one raise its head. Its eyes were blue. The sound that left its throat was not human. "Back!" Walton roared. but before the words were finished, the creatures were upon them. Steel clashed in the snow. The men fought with terror in their hearts, striking again and again at foes that would not bleed. Ramsay slashed at one, severing its arm. It fell and rose again, hissing. Another lunged at him, and Midnight leapt, dragging it down in a fury of teeth and bloodless flesh. "Fire!" Ramsay shouted. "Burn them!" They drove the things back toward the flames. One by one they fell, burning with a hiss like wet snow. When it was done, 5 of Ramsay's men were dead, and the Knight Walton bled from a wound in his shoulder. "What were they?" Walton gasped. Ramsay stared at the ashes. "Old stories made flesh," he said. "And if they've crossed this far south, the snows will not stop them." He crouched beside the dead, running a gloved hand over the runes carved into the stones. "This is older than any house, older than the first men." When they returned to the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton listened in silence as his son told the tale. "Blue eyes," Rose said softly when he was done. "You're certain?" Ramsay nodded. The Lord of the Dreadfort sat back, fingers steepled. "There are things stirring beyond the wall. I have heard whispers from the Night's Watch. Perhaps they walk again." Ramsay smiled faintly. "Then perhaps the North will need strong men to hold it." "Strong," Rose said, "and disciplined. The living are more dangerous than the dead, Ramsay. Do not forget that." That night, Ramsay walked alone upon the battlements. The sky above was dark, the stars cold and distant. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down upon the north, like a hand upon the throat. He thought of the empty village, the frozen faces, the fire that burned without wood. He thought of the creatures' eyes, blue as ice, and the hunger in them that mirrored his own. Perhaps, he mused, there were worse monsters than he, but the thought did not trouble him. It thrilled him. He turned from the wall, the snow whispering beneath his boots, and descended once more into the Dreadfort's depths, where his hounds waited. If the North was doomed to face the cold and the dead, then Ramsay Snow would meet them gladly. For in his heart, he too was a creature of winter, merciless, patient, and born to kill. And as the wind howled beyond the walls, the bastard of Bolton smiled into the dark. The days that followed were a blur of gray skies and ceaseless wind. Ravens came and went from the Dreadfort, bearing tidings from every corner of the north. Strange tidings. Shepherds whispered of shadows that moved by moonlight, of fires seen upon frozen lakes where no men dwelt. A ranger of the Night's Watch, half dead and raving, had been found south of the Gift. His eyes were wild, his hands black with frostbite, and he spoke only one phrase before death took him. "They come." Rose Bolton kept the news close, sharing it with no lord but his own blood. Ramsay listened to it all with a curiosity that bordered on delight. Dead things walking, he mused as they sat in the hall one cold morning. If the tales are true, they do not fear pain, nor cold, nor death. They might make fine soldiers. Rose's eyes lifted, pale and unreadable. "You cannot flay what does not bleed." "Then perhaps I will learn a new art," Ramsay said, smiling thinly. Rose regarded him for a long, still moment. "You think this a jest, but if the wall falls, there will be no jest left in the world. Every man from the Dreadfort to Dorne will bleed alike. Then we must make certain we stand on the right side of the bleeding," Ramsay replied. His father said nothing. But that night, when Ramsay returned to his chambers, a parchment awaited him upon the table. Sealed with black wax, the sigil of House Bolton pressed deep into its face. "Ride north," it read in Roose's cold hand. "Find the truth of what stirs beyond the woods of the Barrowlands. If the dead truly walk, I would know it before the Starks or their wolves do. Ramsay's grin returned. He relished being sent where others feared to tread. 2 days later, he rode out with a small company, 10 men, hardened riders, each sworn by fear more than loyalty. Midnight padded beside his horse, her breath steaming in the cold. The wind keened across the moors, carrying with it a smell of rot that seemed to cling even to the snow. They passed through villages that had half emptied, doors barred, fires cold. The folk there would not look them in the eye. When Ramsay questioned them, they spoke of lights seen upon the hills and of screams that came from beneath the earth. By the third night, they reached the Barrowlands, a wide, haunted plain of old kings' graves and half-buried stones. Ramsay made camp among the mounds. The men built a fire, though the wood smoked more than it burned, and the hounds would not settle, growling at shadows no one else could see. Walton, the knight who still bore a scar from the white knife, sat near Ramsay with his cloak drawn tight. "This land's cursed," he muttered. "Old blood lies under these hills. They say the dead kings rise to walk when winter's longest night comes." Ramsay laughed softly. "Then let them rise. Perhaps they'll bow before me." But even as he said it, something moved beyond the firelight. A whisper, a crack of ice. The men froze. Midnight's growl deepened. "Who's there?" Ramsay called. No answer came, only the sigh of the wind through the mounds. Then, from the darkness, a pale figure appeared. It was a man, or what had once been one, naked to the waist, his flesh gray as the snow around him. His eyes glowed faintly blue. He moved without sound. "Seven save us," one soldier breathed. Ramsay rose, sword in hand. "Hold your ground." The thing stepped closer, the firelight dancing across its dead face. It tilted its head, as if studying them. Then, with a suddenness that made every man flinch, it was upon them. The first blow split the nearest soldier from collar to belly. The others fell back, shouting. Ramsay met the creature head-on, his sword ringing against its cold flesh. It did not bleed. He struck again, harder, and this time his blade bit deep into its neck. The head fell, rolling across the snow. The body did not fall. Ramsay stared in disbelief as it staggered forward, headless, arms groping blindly. "Fire!" he shouted. "Burn it!" Walton seized a torch and thrust it against the corpse. The flesh blackened and curled, and only then did it collapse. The men stood panting in the cold, the smell of burnt skin thick in the air. Ramsay looked around, eyes gleaming. "There are more," he said. "I can feel them." He was right. From the hills came movement, dozens of shapes, pale and slow, rising from the barrows like the ghosts of the kings who had ruled before the coming of men. "Mount up," Ramsay barked. "We ride." They fled into the storm, the dead following without sound. The horses screamed as they galloped through the snow, hooves slipping upon the ice. One rider fell, dragged down in an instant, his cries fading beneath the wind. Ramsay did not look back. By dawn, only 5 remained. They reached the river, crossing upon the ice that groaned beneath their weight. Behind them, the barrow field was silent again. Walton slumped in his saddle, eyes hollow. "We cannot fight that," he said. "No man can." Ramsay's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sky was turning pale. "No man," he agreed, "but perhaps a monster might." When they returned to the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton was waiting. He heard his son's tale without expression. When Ramsay finished, his father spoke only once. "The world changes," Rose said. "If the dead walk, the living must learn to walk beside them, or beneath. Ramsay nodded slowly. Then perhaps the time has come for House Bolton to claim its place above all. Rose's eyes flickered. Do not mistake ruin for opportunity. Even wolves know when to hide from the storm. But Ramsay was already smiling. And some wolves bite through it. That night, alone in his chamber, he traced his fingers across the hilt of his knife, feeling the notches along the edge. He imagined those blue eyes staring back at him through the snow, unfeeling, unstoppable. He did not fear them. He envied them. No pain, no weakness, no hunger but the one that drives. He stood before the mirror, his reflection pale and still, and whispered, "When death comes south, it will find me ready." Outside, the wind rose to a scream, battering the towers of the Dreadfort. Somewhere far beyond the river, in the white wastes near the Barrowlands, the dead stirred once more, and Ramsay Snow, bastard of Bolton, smiled into the storm, dreaming of the day when even the grave itself might kneel before him. The snows came harder with each passing day, until even the great weeping water seemed swallowed by white. Smoke rose thin from the Dreadfort's chimneys, and the men within whispered that winter had come for good and all. Food grew scarce, tempers shorter. The bastion of House Bolton stood defiant against the cold, yet unease hung over it like a pall. The servants had begun to tell stories. They said the bastard's hunt beyond the Barrowlands had woken things best left sleeping, that ghosts now walked the woods by night. Some swore they had seen blue lights flickering near the riverbanks. Others claimed to hear weeping from beneath the old crypts when the wind blew from the east. Ramsay Snow listened to such talk with amusement. He sat by the hearth in his father's hall, dressed in black furs, his pale eyes glimmering with quiet mischief. "Let them whisper," he said, when Rose's steward sought to silence the gossip. "Fear is a faithful servant. Better they dread shadows than think themselves safe." Rose did not answer, but the thin line of his mouth tightened. "You have stirred enough fear for one winter," he said at last. "The North watches us closely. House Stark may be gone, but its shadow still lies heavy on the hearts of men. I will not have that shadow turned against me." Ramsay tilted his head. "And if it turns on me instead? Then you had best learn how to stand in the dark," Rose said. A week later, a raven came from the south, its message sealed with the black and gold of the phrase. Rose read the parchment in silence. When he looked up, his gaze was cold. "The phrase asked for a show of loyalty," he said. "A band of Karstark men raid their supply trains near the Twins. They wish us to answer." Ramsay smiled faintly. "Then I shall ride." "You shall not," Roose said sharply. "You have already drawn enough blood in my name. I will send men I can trust." Ramsay's expression did not change, but his hand closed slowly over the arm of his chair. "And you do not trust me?" "I trust that you will do what pleases you," Rose replied. "That is not the same thing." That night, Ramsay did not sleep. He paced his chamber until dawn, listening to the wind batter against the shutters. His father's words gnawed at him. Not trusted, not yet worthy. Always the bastard, never the son. When the first pale light touched the horizon, he rose and summoned his squire. "Ready my horse," he said. "We ride north." The boy hesitated. "Lord Roose forbade." Ramsay's hand flashed. The back of his glove cracked across the squire's face. "Then we ride all the faster." By mid-morning, he was gone from the Dreadfort, taking 6 men and a pack of hounds. He claimed the ride was a hunt, but no man dared ask what quarry he sought. They followed the frozen river east, where the land grew wild and empty. The snows were deep, and the cold bit like teeth. On the third day, they came upon a small holdfast half buried in ice. Smoke rose from its chimney, yet no one answered when they called. Ramsay dismounted, his boots crunching over the drift. "Stay with the horses," he ordered. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hall was still. A single candle burned upon the table. The fire had long since gone out, leaving only ashes. Beside the hearth sat a man, stiff and pale, his eyes wide open and rimmed with frost. Ramsay knelt, studying the body. The man's throat was unmarked. No wound, no struggle. Death had come quietly. He rose and turned toward the stair that led below. The air was colder there, heavy with the smell of earth and something older. He descended slowly, torch in hand, until the steps ended in a narrow crypt. Shapes lay upon the floor, 5, perhaps 6, all frozen in death, their faces gray and still. But it was not the dead that drew his gaze. It was the marks upon the wall, strange symbols carved into the stone, curling like vines, filled with what looked like black ice. They pulsed faintly in the torchlight, and the air around them shimmered with cold. Ramsay reached out, fingers hovering above the carvings. The chill stung his skin even before he touched them. Then the whisper came. It was not a sound so much as a breath, a faint exhalation that seemed to stir the torch flame. His name, spoken softly, almost tenderly. Ramsay. He froze, every sense alive. The dead lay still, yet the whisper came again. Blood of flayed men, son of the Pale One, the cold remembers you. Ramsay's breath steamed in the air. He could not tell whether the voice came from within the stone or from within himself. He drew back, but not in fear, in fascination. "Show yourself," he whispered. The torch sputtered, and for an instant he thought he saw it, a figure half-formed in the dark, tall and white as snow, with eyes like blue fire. Then it was gone, leaving only silence and the faint scent of frost. Ramsay stood there for a long while, his pulse steady. When he climbed back to the surface, the men waited uneasily by the gate. "Nothing lives here," he said, "but something watches." They did not ask what he meant. That night, they made camp in the ruins of the holdfast. The wind howled through the cracks, and the hounds whimpered in their sleep. Ramsay lay awake, staring at the rafters. He thought of the voice, of the blue light flickering in the dark. It had known his name. By dawn, he had made his choice. When they returned to the Dreadfort, Rose met him in the hall, eyes cold as ever. "You disobeyed me again," he said. Ramsay smiled faintly. "I found something better than a phrase favor." Rose's brow darkened. "What did you find?" Ramsay hesitated, then said softly, "Power." His father's voice was like ice. "Power is a candle in the wind. You are not yet wise enough to hold it." Ramsay's grin widened. "Then I shall learn to hold the storm itself." Rose's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, then turned away. "Pray the storm does not choose to hold you first." That night, Ramsay returned to the crypt beneath the Dreadfort where the flayed banners hung in the dark. He knelt among the bones of his forebears and whispered into the cold, "I heard you." A faint gust stirred the torches, though the air was still, and in that whisper of movement, Ramsay Snow thought he heard the same voice again, soft as snow falling upon stone. "Then listen well, little lord. The North remembers, and soon so shall you." Ramsay smiled into the dark. He did not know whether it was madness or destiny that called to him, but whatever it was his. Outside, winter howled across the frozen lands, and deep beneath the Dreadfort, something ancient stirred in answer. The cold did not break. It settled deeper into the bones of the north, a cruel weight that bent roofs, froze rivers, and silenced the land. The Dreadfort endured, its crimson walls half buried in drifts, smoke spilling endlessly from its chimneys like breath from some slumbering beast. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning pitch and old fear. Ramsay's snow had changed. The servants knew it, the guards whispered of it, and even Rose Bolton, whose gaze could freeze a man at 20 paces, watched his son with something close to unease. He no longer sought the noise of cruelty for its own sake. His laughter had become rare, brittle when it came. He spoke to no one of what he had seen in the barrow crypts, but some nights he would wake drenched in sweat, his breath misting as though he had slept in frost. Rumor spread that the bastard prayed now, not to the Seven, nor even to the old gods, but to something colder. Once, a kitchen boy claimed to have seen him standing barefoot in the snow beneath the flayed man banner, whispering to the wind. The boy told this tale only once. By morning, he was gone, and the hounds ate well that day. Rose summoned Ramsay to the great hall soon after. The lord sat in his fur-draped chair, pale as bone, the candlelight casting sharp shadows upon his face. "You are restless," he said when Ramsay entered. "You walk the halls at night. My men fear you." "They should," Ramsay replied. Rose's voice did not rise. "Fear is a weapon, but a weapon left to swing in every direction cuts down friend and foe alike." "I have few friends," Ramsay said, "and fewer I could not replace." Rose's eyes narrowed. "You would do well to remember who cannot be replaced." For a moment, the air between them seemed to hum with quiet tension. Then Ramsay smiled, small, sharp, and without mirth. "You mean you, father. I remember." The silence that followed was as cold as the wind outside. At last, Rose rose. "There are ravens from the north. The watch speaks of strange fires on the far side of the wall. I mean to send men to learn the truth. You will not go." Ramsay's smile faded. "You forbid me again? You will remain here. The Dreadfort needs its master." Ramsay's gaze darkened, though he bowed his head. "As you command." But later that night, he stood alone upon the battlements, the snow whipping about him. The stars were veiled by cloud, and the air had that stillness that comes before storm. His breath misted as he spoke softly to the dark. "I am master of nothing while you draw breath, old man," he whispered. The wind shifted, carrying faint laughter, or something like it, through the air. Ramsay froze, every sense alive. It came again, faint and distant, from the direction of the kennels. He descended the stairs, torches flickering as he passed. The hound stirred uneasily when he entered. Midnight growled low, tail between her legs. "Quiet," Ramsay murmured. The laughter came again, faint but distinct, rising from beneath the floor. The old catacombs. He pried up the flagstone and slipped below, torchlight dancing across the damp stone. The air grew colder the deeper he went, until his breath came in white clouds. At last, he reached the crypt where his forebears lay, lords and ladies of Bolton past, wrapped in furs and shadows. At the far end, something gleamed upon the wall, those same curling runes he had seen at the Barrow Crypt, half hidden by frost. As he approached, the torch sputtered, its flame shrinking to a thin blue line. The whisper came again. "You have heard the call, blood of the flayed. You have walked the places of the cold kings. You are marked." Ramsay's pulse quickened. "What do you want of me?" "To remember." The frost on the stone shimmered. For an instant the runes seemed to shift and form shapes. A great figure crowned in ice, its face lost in shadow. The voice was deeper now, filled with something vast and ancient. Your forefathers served the Red Kings, flayers of men, breakers of the North, but they forgot who first gave them their strength. I do not forget. I wait. Ramsay stepped closer, his breath freezing on his lips. Who are you? The North before the first men. The winter that does not end. The torch guttered and died. Darkness swallowed him. For a heartbeat, Ramsay stood utterly still, and in that silence he felt something press against his mind. A cold that was not merely of the air, but of thought itself, vast and pitiless. He saw a field of endless white, where shapes moved like ghosts beneath the snow. He saw towers of frost, rivers of black ice, and the glimmer of eyes that burned blue across a frozen waste. When the vision faded, he was alone once more, his torch reignited, though he could not recall lighting it. He stumbled from the crypt, the laughter echoing behind him. By dawn, he had locked himself in his chambers. The servants heard him pacing for hours, speaking softly to himself, the words too low to catch. When at last he emerged, something in him had changed. His eyes seemed clearer, colder, and his voice when he spoke was calm as still water. That evening, he went to his father. "You were right," Ramsay said. "Fear must be tended carefully. I have been too wild." Rose studied him. "You have learned this overnight?" "Perhaps the cold has taught me." Rose nodded slowly. "Good. Winter will teach many lessons before it ends." He dismissed his son, and Ramsay bowed and turned away. But as he left the hall, he smiled faintly to himself. That night, as the snow buried the gates of the Dreadfort, Ramsay stood again in the kennels. Midnight watched from the shadows as he took a small knife and dragged its edge across his palm. Blood welled up, steaming in the cold. He let it fall onto the flagstones, whispering words he did not know yet somehow remembered. The air shimmered faintly, and frost spread outward from where the blood struck stone, crawling like veins. Ramsay's eyes glimmered in the torchlight. "The North remembers," he murmured, "but so do I." Outside, the storm howled louder than before, and deep beneath the castle, something answered. A sound like ice breaking upon stone, slow and deliberate, echoing up through the walls. The men of the Dreadfort woke in the night to the hounds howling without end, and none dared ask what had roused them. For in the heart of the Dreadfort, Ramsay Snow had found a new master. Or perhaps, at last, he had become one. The storm did not pass with dawn. For 3 days and nights the wind screamed around the Dreadfort's towers, flinging sheets of snow against its crimson walls until the banners hung stiff as boards. Men said they had never seen such a blizzard, even in the cruelest winters of old. The godswood lay buried, the weirwood's pale face drowned beneath the weight of ice. Inside the castle, the fires burned higher, and fear burned with them. Ramsay Snow moved through the halls like a ghost, silent, tireless, his boots leaving prints that filled with frost. Servants crossed themselves when he passed. Some swore the air grew colder in his wake. He slept little now, and when he did, he dreamed of the voice in the crypt, the voice that had whispered his name. In his dreams, he walked through endless snowfields, lit by no sun, where shapes of ice moved through the mist. He did not fear them. He followed. Rose Bolton saw the change in him, but spoke of it to no one. The Lord of the Dreadfort was not a man easily shaken, yet even he felt unease settle like ash upon his heart. One night, as the storm howled outside, he summoned his son to the hall. Ramsay came at once, his furs dusted white with snow. "You have not been yourself," Rose said. Ramsay's smile was thin. "Then I have improved?" "Speak plain," Rose said. "Where do you go at night? What do you seek in the crypts?" "The truth," Ramsay answered softly. Truth of what? Ramsay's gaze lifted, bright with strange light. Of who we are, of what waits for us beneath the ice. We are not wolves, Father. We are older things. The North remembers our kind, even if men forget. Rose's eyes narrowed. You speak madness. Do I? Ramsay stepped closer. You have built your strength on fear and silence, but there are powers that do not need fear. They only need cold. I have heard them. They know our blood. Rose studied him in silence for a long time. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the great hall. Whatever it is you have stirred, Rose said at last, you will leave it be. This house will stand on the strength of men, not ghosts. Ramsay bowed, though his eyes did not lower. As you command. He left without another word. But when the doors closed behind him, Rose exhaled slowly, the faintest trace of unease in his breath. That night, the storm broke. It came with a crash that shook the towers, a sound like thunder, though no lightning split the sky. Men woke to the cries of the hounds and the pounding of hooves in the yard. The gates were open, snow sweeping inward as if drawn by unseen hands. "Shut them!" shouted the guards, but the wind fought them, a living force. Through the storm came shapes, dark at first, then white, then human. 5 riders, cloaked in furs, crusted with ice. They bore no banners, but their horses steamed in the cold. At their head rode a man with hair white as hoarfrost and eyes so pale they seemed to glow. Rose met them in the yard, his men at his back. "You ride unbidden to the Dreadfort," he said. "Name yourselves." The leader dismounted slowly. "We are from Last Hearth," he said. His voice was hoarse, as if the cold had clawed at his throat. "We bring warning." "Speak it." "The dead move," the man rasped. "We fought them by the lake. They do not die." A murmur swept through the yard. Rose's face did not change. "And what do you want of me?" "Sanctuary, fire, food." Rose gave the order. The gates closed, the storm still raging beyond. The Umbermen were taken inside, given bread and ale, though they ate little. Their eyes darted toward every shadow, as if expecting something to follow them through the door. Ramsay watched them from the far end of the hall, silent and still. When one of the men met his gaze, he looked away quickly. That night, while the castle slept, Ramsay crept to the chambers where the Umber riders lay. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across their faces. He moved among them like smoke, studying each in turn. Then he saw it, a dark mark upon the wrist of one man, faintly blue beneath the skin, like frost spreading from within. Ramsay crouched, touching it lightly. The flesh was cold. The man's eyes flew open. They were blue. The scream woke the castle. By the time Rose reached the hall, Ramsay stood over the bodies, his blade slick with blood. 4 men lay dead. The 5th sat upright, his chest rising and falling, though no breath came. "What have you done?" Rose demanded. Ramsay pointed with his knife. "Look!" The corpse's eyes burned with faint, icy light. The air itself seemed to freeze around it. "Fire!" Rose said. "Now!" They dragged the body to the hearth. When it burned, the smell was unlike anything of man or beast, sharp, foul, ancient. The blue light faded at last, leaving only blackened flesh. When the hall cleared, Rose turned to his son. "You knew." "I guessed," Ramsay said. "The mark gave it away. The cold travels in blood." Rose's voice was low. "You should have called for me." "I did not need to. It was already here." "What was?" Ramsay smiled faintly. "The gift of winter." Rose stared at him for a long moment. "If you mean to bring such gifts to my house again, I will end you myself." Ramsay said nothing. But that night, in the solitude of his chamber, He washed his blade and held the water up to the candlelight. The surface shimmered strangely, not from flame, but from something deeper, a faint pulse of cold that did not fade. He remembered the whisper in the crypt, "You are marked." The next day, the storm passed. The sky cleared, a hard, pitiless blue. The land lay silent beneath the sun, but in the kennels, the hounds whined and clawed at their cages. Their breath steamed thick in the air, though the fires burned bright. The kennel master found frost spreading across the stone floor, creeping outward from where Ramsay's boots had stood. By nightfall, the frost had reached the walls, and in the heart of the Dreadfort, Ramsay Snow stood before the mirror, watching his reflection fog the glass with cold breath. "The North remembers," he whispered again, and this time the words did not sound like his own. They echoed back to him in the voice of the storm itself. By the turning of that cruel winter's moon, the Dreadfort had grown silent in a way that set even its oldest stones on edge. The howling of hounds no longer filled the nights, for the beasts had turned restless, whining at shadows that no eye could name. Frost crept along the walls from within, not without, and men woke to find their breath frosting even before the hearth fire. None dared speak it aloud, yet every soul beneath that crimson roof felt it, the bastard's curse. Ramsay Snow walked among them like a wraith. He ate little, slept less. His face grew gaunter, his eyes brighter, glacial and unblinking. He spoke to no one but his hounds, and even they slunk from his touch. When he crossed the yard, the men turned away. Once he had inspired terror, now he inspired something colder. Rose Bolton watched all with the same still gaze that had unmanned kings. Yet though his voice remained calm, his thoughts stirred like black water beneath ice. The night the umber corpses had burned, something unseen had changed in his son. He had seen it in the boy's eyes. Not madness, no, something older, something that waited. And Rose Bolton feared little in this world, but he feared that. On the third night after the storm broke, Rose summoned Ramsay once more. The hall was near empty. Only 2 torches burned, casting long shadows across the stone. "You've brought death into this house," the Lord of the Dreadfort said. Ramsay smiled faintly. "I was born here. Death has always lived beside me." "Do not trifle with me," Rose said. "Whatever curse you found in those crypts, end it, destroy it." Ramsay's smile did not falter. "Can you destroy winter, Father?" Rose's eyes hardened. "You would defy me?" "I would surpass you," Ramsay said softly. "The North belongs to the strong. You have ruled through whispers and fear, but there are powers that bend even kings." Rose stood slowly, his voice low and cold. "You think to master what you do not understand. Men like you burn brightly and die quickly. Remember that." He turned from the hall, leaving Ramsay alone by the firelight. When he was gone, Ramsay laughed. It was a soft, strange sound, without mirth, without warmth. The next morning, the sky was the color of steel, and the weeping water lay frozen to its depths. Ramsay rode from the Dreadfort with no retinue, only his hound Midnight at his side. None tried to stop him. He said nothing of where he went, but the guards swore later that frost followed his horse's steps across the yard. He rode north for 2 days through deep snow and brittle silence until the hills rose before him, the old barrow field, where he had first heard the whisper. The wind there was still. The mounds lay buried beneath ice, the runestones half swallowed by snowdrifts. But Ramsay felt it at once, the cold that was not of the air, the same chill that had whispered his name. He dismounted, drawing his knife. The blade steamed in the air, mist curling from its edge. "I am here," he said into the emptiness. At first, there was no reply. Then the snow began to move. It slid away from the barrows, a slow uncoiling, revealing dark shapes beneath. The ground groaned softly, and from the shadow of the largest mound a figure rose, tall, lean, its flesh pale as frozen milk. Ramsay did not flinch. "You called me." The figure's eyes glowed faintly blue. When it spoke, its voice came like wind over ice. Blood remembers blood. "What do you want of me?" Ramsay asked. The North does not belong to wolves alone. There were kings before them, red kings, flayers, breakers. They are gone, but their line remains. Ramsay smiled faintly. "And I am that line? You are the echo of what was. Serve the cold, and all shall bow before you." He took a step closer, the frost cracking beneath his boots. "And if I refuse?" The figure's eyes blazed brighter. "Then you shall kneel regardless." For a heartbeat, they stood in silence, the living and the dead, bound by the same frozen breath. Then Ramsay raised his knife. "Then I serve," he said. The thing reached out, its fingers long and white. When they touched his chest, cold seared through flesh and bone, burning deeper than fire. Ramsay gasped, his breath turning to shards of frost. When the vision passed, he knelt upon the snow, steam rising from his body. The mound was empty once more. Yet in the silence, he felt it within him. A pulse, slow and cold, beating in time with the wind. He rose, the knife still in his hand. Its edge shimmered faintly blue. When Ramsay returned to the Dreadfort, the men shrank from him as before. But this time, it was more than fear. The torches dimmed when he passed. The air around him steamed with cold. Rose Bolton met him in the hall once more. "You went north." "I did." "What did you bring back?" Ramsay smiled. "A gift." He opened his palm. Upon it lay a shard of black ice, no larger than a coin, glimmering faintly in the torchlight. Rose's eyes narrowed. "Cast it into the fire." "Why should I destroy what makes me strong?" Ramsay asked. "You are my son," Rose said quietly. "But if you bring doom upon this house, I will flay you myself." Ramsay's smile did not fade. "Perhaps, father. But what if doom does not fear your knife?" He turned and left the hall, leaving only silence in his wake. That night, a scream echoed through the lower towers. The guards who rushed to the sound found Frost climbing the walls like living vines. In the kennels, Midnight stood motionless, her eyes glazed white. When Ramsay appeared, the hound bowed her head. Rose's men whispered of sorcery, of curses, of the bastard's bargain, but none dared confront him. Days passed, and the cold deepened. The river froze to the bottom, fish trapped like jewels in glass. Frost bloomed along the banners in the great hall, turning the flayed man white. And through it all, Ramsay walked untouched, a shadow crowned in ice. He looked upon the Dreadfort from its highest tower, the wind streaming through his hair. "They will remember my name," he said softly, "not as my father's bastard, but as the North's true son." Below, the first snow of a new storm began to fall, thick, silent, endless, and in the frozen crypts beneath the castle, where no fire reached, faint blue light began to stir between the stones. Winter had settled into the bones of the Dreadfort, and with it came a stillness that smothered even the breath of fire. The snow piled high against the battlements, the wind sang through broken arrow slits, and the world beyond the walls might as well have been buried under ice and silence. Yet within those red stones, something colder than winter had taken hold. Men whispered that the bastard had gone beyond mortal sleep, They said Ramsay Snow did not eat, did not rest, did not bleed. He moved through the halls like a shadow given form, the air itself frosting where his hand brushed the stone. His eyes no longer reflected torchlight. They seemed to absorb it. Rose Bolton watched him with a hunter's patience, but even the lord of the Dreadfort could not deny what he saw. The old power of his house, rooted in fear, sharpened through cruelty, was shifting. There was a deeper cold now, one that no blade or whisper could master, and it wore his son's face. The night the ravens ceased to fly, Rose called a council. Only his most trusted stood beside him, Walton, grim-faced and pale, the maester, shivering in his robes, and 3 captains whose loyalty lay as much in terror as in honor. "We are cut off," Rose said quietly, his voice carrying in the hollow silence of the hall. "The snows have buried the passes south. Even the White Knife has frozen to its bed. Winterfell sends no word, nor Barrowton, nor the twins. For all we know, the north is gone." "And your son?" the Maester asked, his voice trembling. "What is he?" Rose's gaze turned toward the shadows that loomed beyond the firelight. "My mistake," he said at last. As if summoned by the words, the great doors creaked open. The wind rushed in, and with it came Ramsay. He stood in the threshold, the snow swirling around him, his black cloak rimmed with frost. "You speak of me, father," he said, voice soft as the falling snow. Rose's men reached for their blades, but the Lord raised a hand. "You come unbidden to my council." "I come where I am owed," Ramsay replied. "You built your house on fear, and fear has brought you this far. But fear is a small thing beside what waits beyond the walls of this world." Rose studied him in silence. "You would bring doom upon us." "I would bring dominion," Ramsay said. "The old powers have chosen me. They remember the Red Kings who ruled before the wolves. I have their blood." The Master found his voice. "You speak of blasphemy. Those were monsters, worshippers of—" His words cut short as the air turned brittle. Frost spread from Ramsay's feet, crawling across the floor in thin white veins. The Maester's breath caught in his throat, his skin paling as the chill reached him. His eyes went wide, and a moment later, he toppled to the ground, his body hard as marble. No one spoke. Ramsay looked to his father. "The north freezes while you wait, but I will not wait. I will make the cold serve me." Rose's gaze was unreadable. "And what would you have me do, my son?" "Swear fealty," Ramsay said simply. "To me, to the true heir of the Dreadfort, born of ice and blood." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Rose rose slowly, his furs whispering against the stone. He descended the steps of the dais and came to stand before his son. "You would have me kneel?" "Yes." The firelight wavered between them, 2 shadows cast against the frost-bitten walls, the pale lord and the darker thing he had made. Rose drew his dagger, the blade thin and sharp. "A Bolton kneels to no one," he said, and struck. The knife found flesh. Or so he thought. Ramsay did not flinch. His father's dagger sank deep into his chest, yet no blood welled forth. Only frost, fine and white, spilled from the wound. Rose stared. The blade froze to his hand. A slow, terrible smile curved his son's lips. "I am beyond you now," Ramsay whispered. The frost spread upward, crawling from the blade to Rose's wrist, his arm, his shoulder. The Lord of the Dreadfort gasped, his eyes widening as the cold claimed him. In moments he was encased in a thin shell of ice, frozen mid-breath. Ramsay watched until the last flicker of movement died. Then he reached out, touching the frozen face of his father. The ice cracked with a sound like shattering glass. "Fear dies," he said softly. but I do not." He turned to the others. Walton knelt first, his face gray with terror. The captains followed. None dared look upon the corpse that had been their lord. Ramsay's voice was calm. "Spread word. The North is no longer ruled by wolves or cowards. The Bolton name will rise anew, stronger than fire, colder than death. All who kneel shall live beneath my shadow. Those who do not shall join the ice." The men bowed their heads. That night, the Dreadfort's fires burned blue. The next days passed in a silence thicker than snow. The frozen body of Rose Bolton was set within the crypt, though the air there grew so cold that no man lingered long. Some said they heard whispers from the stone, a father's voice murmuring to the son who had slain him. Ramsay, now lord of the Dreadfort, stood upon the battlements each dusk, watching the white horizon. The storm had eased, but the land lay dead. Villages vanished beneath drifts. Ravens did not come. The living world had retreated, leaving only the quiet of the cold. Yet Ramsay was not alone. At night, he heard the wind carry voices from beyond the river, the same ancient whisper that had once called to him from the crypts. Sometimes he saw lights moving across the snow, blue and slow as distant stars. He did not fear them. He waited. When spring's first thaw came to the south, none reached the Dreadfort to see it. The castle stood encased in ice, its banners stiff as iron, its gate sealed beneath frost. But those who passed from afar said that at night lights still burned in the towers, cold, unwavering, unearthly. And sometimes, when the wind was right, they heard hounds howling through the storm, and a voice that whispered with them, soft and cruel and everlasting. The North remembers. The Dreadfort was a tomb now, a fortress of crimson stone wrapped in frost and silence, where no bird sang and no fire dared burn for long. The snow lay heavy on its towers, sealing the gates like a shroud, and the banners that once bore the flayed man hung stiff and white, their color drained by the cold. Yet from within that frozen citadel, a faint light pulsed at night, not the gold of torch or hearth, but a cold, blue shimmer that crawled along the walls like the heartbeat of some sleeping god. Men said the bastard still walked those halls, though none living had seen him in many weeks. Ramsay Snow, Ramsay Bolton no longer, had become something else. He stood now in the great hall that had once belonged to his father. The hearth was dark, but frost glowed faintly upon the stones, casting its own strange light. Rose Bolton's seat was gone, shattered to fragments by the cold, and in its place stood a slab of black ice that caught Ramsay's reflection and threw it back at him, pale and inhuman. Around him, the silence was perfect. Even the wind had ceased to cry through the arrow slits. He turned his gaze upward to where icicles hung from the rafters like teeth. His breath rose in thin, white wisps, vanishing before it reached the air above. "So this is rule," he murmured. "This is dominion." He could no longer recall when last he'd felt hunger, or warmth, or pain. His flesh did not crack in the cold, and his blood, what remained of it, ran slow and clear as water. The voice that had guided him from the barrows had long since gone quiet, yet he knew it was near, always watching. The Dreadfort's remaining men, those who had not fled or frozen, dwelt now in the lower vaults, where faint fires still flickered. They dared not approach their new lord, though sometimes they heard him moving through the halls above, his boots crunching faintly over the frost. The kennel master was among the last to live. He kept the hounds fed as best he could, though the beasts had grown strange, silent, wide-eyed, their breath misting cold as the air itself. One night he came to the hall, trembling, to beg leave to depart for the south. "My lord," he he stammered, kneeling in the frost. "The men are afraid. There's no food left, and the snow grows higher each day. Let us go while the river still bears us." Ramsay turned his gaze upon him. His eyes were pale as glass. "Go?" he said softly. "And where would you run when winter itself serves me?" The kennel master trembled, his breath fogging the air. "You're not the same, my lord. You're wrong. Not of flesh, not anymore. I seen your shadow, and it moves when you don't." Ramsay's smile was small and distant. "The shadow serves the man, as the man serves the storm." The kennel master tried to rise, but his knees failed him. "Please." Ramsay lifted a hand. The air thickened, the light dimmed. Frost spread outward from his boots, crawling up the walls, along the floor, until it reached the man's feet. The kennel master gasped as ice locked around his legs, his arms, his chest. And still Ramsay's hand did not lower. When the silence returned, another statue stood among the others, white and perfect, eyes wide with terror. Ramsay stepped past him without a glance. "None shall leave the Dreadfort," he murmured. "Not man, not hound." He descended to the crypts once more, where his father slept beneath the stone. The frost had swallowed even Rose Bolton's body now, entombing it in clear ice. Ramsay stood before it, his reflection flickering across the surface. "Father," he said, "you wanted fear. I have given you silence." He reached out and pressed his palm against the ice. For an instant, it seemed to pulse beneath his hand, as though something within still lived. Ramsay smiled faintly. "Sleep. Your work is done." Above, the Dreadfort moaned in the wind. That night, the sky cleared. The moon rose over the frozen river, and the stars burned sharp and cold. From the battlements, one could see for miles, across the wastes of white that had once been forest and field, to where distant hills glimmered faintly beneath the snow. Ramsay stood there, cloak whipping around him, his hounds arrayed at his feet. They were not as they had been. Their fur was streaked with frost, their eyes pale as their masters. Beyond the river, faint blue lights moved through the dark, slow and deliberate, like the march of 1,000 souls. Ramsay watched them, and the corner of his mouth curved upward. "So it begins," he whispered. He descended the stairs and called his men. Those who still lived came trembling to the yard, their faces hollow with fear. Ramsay's voice carried easily through the still air. "Winter is not our foe," he said. "It is our inheritance. The Starks once ruled through blood and fire. We will rule through ice and eternity. When the rest of the North kneels in snow and death, they will remember the name Bolton, not as men, but as the last lords of the living cold." No one answered him, save the wind. But Ramsay did not need their words. He could feel their hearts beating, fragile and quick, and it pleased him. He raised his hand, and the air stirred. Frost crawled over their armor, their hair, their lips, yet they did not flee. They could not. When the dawn came, the yard was still. The men stood motionless where they had knelt, their faces calm, their eyes clear as glass. A thin mist rose from their mouths, not breath, but memory, and Ramsay stood among them, unblinking. "Now we wait," he said. The blue lights beyond the river came closer with each night. The air grew heavier, and the sky turned the color of iron. From the south, no ravens came. The world was swallowed by the white. In time, the Dreadfort's gates vanished beneath the drifts. The towers collapsed under the weight of the storm, and even the banners froze and broke apart. But still, within that ruin, something moved, faintly, endlessly. and when the wind swept low across the north, the travelers who braved those wastes said they heard it, the faint echo of hounds howling through the storm, and a voice that whispered among them, "The bastard is king now, and winter bows to him." The snows had swallowed the north entire. Rivers lay locked beneath ice thicker than castle walls, forests bowed beneath the weight of endless frost, and the mountains stood like pale sentinels, their peaks shrouded in mist. All that lived clung to silence, and even the crows had fled south, their wings heavy with hunger. Only the Dreadfort endured. It stood like a scar upon the white plain, its towers rimed in frost, its stones veined with ice that glowed faintly blue beneath the winter moon. From afar it seemed dead, a ruin long abandoned. But those who dared come close, a handful of wildlings, a band of deserters from the watch, a wandering company of umbers seeking kin, told darker tales. They spoke of the lights, of how the castle shone by night with an unholy shimmer, and of how the wind carried laughter through its broken gates. Some said they saw men upon the walls, pale and unmoving. Others swore they heard the baying of hounds echoing across the snow. Not the sound of beasts, but something deeper, something that crawled beneath the skin. None stayed long enough to see the truth. None returned a second time. Deep within the fortress, Ramsay Snow sat upon his seat of black ice. His father's hall was gone. In its place stretched a chamber of frost, its walls glittering with frozen veins of blue fire. The torches burned coldly, their flames white as bone. Before him stood what remained of his men. Not soldiers now, not truly living. Their eyes were pale, their skin smooth as carved marble. They did not speak unless he willed it. They moved only when commanded. They were his army, his kin, his silence made flesh. Ramsay watched them, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his throne. He no longer felt cold. He no longer felt anything at all. "So this is peace," he murmured. His voice echoed softly through the hall, neither breath nor sound, but something between. No cries, no hunger, only stillness. He looked down at his hound, Midnight, lying at his feet. The beast was beautiful now, fur white as snow, eyes like shards of glass. She slept without breath, without warmth, and yet she would wake at his thought. A sound stirred the silence, a deep rumble, faint but steady, from far below. Ramsay rose. The frost beneath his boots cracked and reformed. He crossed the hall and descended the stair to the crypts. The air grew colder with each step, the light dimmer. At the lowest vault he paused before the ice-bound figure of his father. Rose Bolton sat forever frozen, the expression on his face still calm, still judging. "You doubted me," Ramsay said softly, "but I have given your house what you never could, eternity." The frost upon the corpse's lips seemed to twitch as though it might speak. For a moment, Ramsay thought he saw the faintest flicker of breath, but when he blinked, it was gone. "Sleep," he said. "Your silence serves me now." He turned and climbed again to the upper halls. The air trembled faintly. He could feel it through the walls. The storm had shifted. The dead wind that had blown for so long was changing its song. He stepped onto the battlements. The sky above was a sea of gray, but at its heart gleamed a faint light, pale and cold, not the sun, but something older. Across the horizon, the white plain rippled. They were coming. At first, they were only shapes in the snow, shadows upon shadows. Then, as the light deepened, their forms took shape, ranks of the dead, their eyes burning with the same blue fire that gleamed in the Dreadfort's walls. They came without sound, without hurry, filling the horizon from end to end. Ramsay watched them without fear. "You've come late," he said quietly. "The north already serves the cold." The hounds below began to stir, their voices rising in a low, distant howl that rolled across the ice like thunder. Within the fortress, the frozen soldiers turned their heads toward the gate as one. The air thickened, trembling with power. The first of the dead reached the walls. They did not climb. They flowed, ice and flesh and shadow, rising like water frozen in motion. The gates shattered beneath the weight of frost, and still Ramsay did not move. He raised his hand, and the dead within the Dreadfort turned their blank faces toward him. "Welcome home," he said. The storm broke. It swept through the castle like a living thing, howling and bright. Ice met ice, and the walls screamed as they split. Blue light poured upward, swallowing the towers, the yard, the kennels. The world vanished into snow and silence. When at last the wind stilled, there was no Dreadfort left, only a field of glassy frost where it had stood. Beneath that frozen plain, shadows flickered, faint and distant, like shapes moving beneath clear water. The next travelers to pass that way were wildlings fleeing south. They spoke of a vast mirror stretched across the earth, smooth as a lake and cold enough to burn through leather. Beneath it, they said, one could see faces. Some were human, others were not. And at night, when the moon hung low and pale, a figure would sometimes appear upon that glass. A man in black furs, eyes shining like ice, with a white hound at his side. He never spoke, but the wind carried whispers all the same. The bastard still rules. No raven brought word of it to Winterfell, for by then the snows had buried every road, and the wall itself had begun to groan under the weight of its own making. Yet those who lived to see another spring swore that when the thaw finally came, the Dreadfort did not melt. Its frozen walls remained untouched by sun or flame, a monument of cold and memory. And though the snows receded, though rivers ran again and green spread southward, none dared settle that cursed land, for the ground itself remembered. Even in summer, when the wind blew from the east, it carried the faint scent of iron and frost, and far away, in the hush between storms, one could still hear the echo of hounds, the sound of the north bowing to its last lord. Ramsay Snow, the Dreadfort bastard, had become more than man, less than God. A relic of cruelty carved in ice, a king of silence in a land of ghosts. And in the long winters that followed, when the cold crept down from the wall and the dead stirred once more, mothers would whisper to their children beside dying fires, "Sleep well, and do not wander far when the snow begins to fall. For in the frozen dark, the bastard still hunts,